Thank you all for joining. We'll start over the next sort of 20, 30 minutes discussing a little bit of a different topic than we've had over the last week at Sibos. So of course we'll touch on blockchain, but mostly get to know the people behind the technology that have joined this space over the last couple years. And what about you guys made that decision and sort of the mindset you bring into new emerging technology. And so why don't we start just quickly introducing, if you guys can introduce yourself and explain a little bit about why you joined the space. What was that use case you fell in love with and why you made the switch and where you came from.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lory, Kehoe. I'm Managing Director of ConsenSys in Ireland. In Ireland, what we do is we act as the development centre for ConsenSys across the region. How I came across blockchain was actually a great way. I was drinking cocktails in Hong Kong at about 12 in the day as well, if I remember. And I asked a friend of mine about Bitcoin, and one question led to another. And it was quite fortuitous. I had time off after the trip in Hong Kong to sit on a beach in Thailand, and I was able to look up lots of questions and then try and find answers to them. And I just became more and more fascinated. And I came back to my boss in Dublin at the time, and I said, if half of this is true, it's going to be massive. I wrote a paper on blockchain with the company at the time, and then we applied to become a center of excellence for the region with that company, and we were successful, and that was the beginning of the journey, and then happily joined ConsenSys about 18 months ago.
Great. And Toon?
My name is Toon Leijtens. I'm the CTO of komgo, and if I'm going back in my career, I came at a point in time where there was a lot of decentralization of computing technology. So I was involved quite a bit in the early days. Also, this is part of my studies to do computer architectures and parallel systems. So with the blockchain technology and the decentralized computing, that really caught my interest. So at the beginning, I was mining. I thought, okay, let's make a living out of that. And the attic is a bit cold, so let's warm it up a bit here. But in the end, I didn't end up with a lot of ethers there, because there was also this Friday where I thought, what the hell, I update my computer, let's do it now. And then I, of course, did not make any backups at all. So there goes my ether. But you better not think about those things anymore. But I really like the fact that we are talking about a system that allows you to compute on every place of the earth, that will allow you to distribute trust across the planet and also make people independent of big institutes. That's what what was drawing me, and for me the smart contracts and also the commodity trade and commodity trade finance space. I immediately connected a few dots to see how this could be useful for that particular industry, with all those parties across the globe that are always struggling with trust and disbelief that someone was speaking the truth or not. And this technology has the ability to at least feed that kind of need.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lex. Thank you so much for having us here. I'm the global fintech co-head at ConsenSys, and we are the operating system for commerce and finance running on the world's largest open source programmable blockchain. I have, I guess, a two-parter. So the first is like the Bitcoin interaction, because you gave yours. At the time, I think it was 2014, I had founded and was running a robo-advisor startup in the US and was doing the conference circuit, and I remember going to a San Francisco Future of Money meetup, and somebody just asked the audience how many people owned Bitcoin. And I felt really lame, because something like 70% of the people in the room, their hands went up, and it's, sort of my ego couldn't handle this fundamental rejection. And so I came home after the conference and I told my wife, my birthday was coming. I was like, that's what I want. I want a Bitcoin for my birthday, just one Bitcoin, which at the time was 250, I think, US dollars. And so for my birthday, she gave me half a Bitcoin, because she thought it was, not a good use of time. So that's number one. And then number two is, I kind of forgot about digital assets for a while because I was so focused on distribution, on the digital distribution of financial product. And in 2017, I touched the industry again through all the token offerings that were happening, and I did a 120-page report on crypto assets, and had an exchange client that was looking into the space and kind of did a real deep dive. And what stood out to me is that the exchange I was working on this for, they didn't even know it existed. You know, they didn't even know that this phenomenon for issuing new interest was even happening, while at the same time you had these programmable industry use cases and networks being spun up at a pace that I've never seen before in the startup ecosystem. I mean, as a fintech entrepreneur, you have $2 billion raised in 2012 in fintech venture, and then 2017 is seeing, you know, 20 billion in these offerings. So for me, that was the aha moment, and I'm really excited about the World Computer story and the idea that the software that used to apply to financial instruments is now embedded in the instruments themselves and the networks on which they travel.
Great. Do you still have that half Bitcoin, the original?
I will not fall for your trick, tax man.
And Monica?
Hi, my name is Monica Singer. I'm from South Africa, and I work for ConsenSys as the South African lead. And I'm just very happy and grateful to be amongst all of you, because I'm very lonely down there, and I love being with people and, you know, the mesh, and you know, I don't want this to end. Yeah. So my story is that 20 years ago, I was asked by the financial markets in South Africa to convert the share certificates and the checks into a digital financial market. So I'm totally passionate about bringing efficiencies to the world, and I took on the challenge just by doing research and saying, okay, how do we do that? And the project was so successful, I became the CEO of the Central Securities Depository, which I created, and I ran for 20 years. And we did everything centralized. So we had the database of all the investors in South Africa dealing with equities, bond and money market instruments, corporate actions, all the things that you do in financial markets very efficiently. But we were still hitting a wall to be able to get to the investors. The banks and the market would not allow us to have the information of investors. So we had to deal with intermediaries, which, as we know, add friction and cost and inefficiencies. And then one day, someone said to me, you need to read this white paper. And I did. And I read Satoshi's paper. And I literally started crying, because what Satoshi did, Satoshi Nakamoto is the creator of Bitcoin, what Satoshi did was to create a new paradigm for the world that in my 20 years of research, I could have not imagined that it was exactly the opposite of what I had created. I created a centralized information system thinking that that will protect the world. And Satoshi says, what if you decentralize information, you allow every investor to have their own information, and you create a ledger that is so perfect that nobody can amend and everybody can see at the same time. And I'm a trained auditor, and I can assure you that auditors, when there's collusion, cannot absolutely pick up the fraud. But imagine if now this ledger gets created real time, the auditor can see it, and therefore they don't have to worry about these internal controls, because this is a verifiable database that gets created transparently. So I went to my board and I said, guys, I think that we won't exist in the near future. You know, we're going to have a Kodak moment. We better Kodak ourselves. And that didn't work out very well, because remember, I was the queen in the castle. Very wealthy, very powerful, very everything. And the shareholders would not give up this power. So eventually I realized the only way that I'm going to bring this new change to the world is by me leaving the castle, joining the plebs, and going to go and invent a new world order with everybody that believes in the same thing that I believe in. And I was so lucky that I resigned in August, and in September, Joe asked me to join him. And the value system of ConsenSys 100% matches my value system. So I thought, no brainer, I'm joining. So the rest is history. Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad you decided to now become our queen at ConsenSys. No, thank you for sharing. I think, I guess there's an obvious shared trait among all of you, which is sort of a curiosity and a willingness to continue to learn outside of what you're doing and beyond, and a curiosity about the world around you that would, in all your ways, you came across blockchain in the first place. Why do you think that is, sort of that mindset that you all have? Is it an innate curiosity? What are sort of the values and principles you bring to sort of a continuing education? For anyone.
I don't know what. Maybe I'll start then. I guess I'm a bit of a troublemaker, and I like breaking rules. I like looking at things and thinking about if there is another way that I guess problems can be solved, or perhaps is even there a better way. Sometimes that gets me into hot water, but I learn a lot along the way. So I think that's probably something that I've done my whole life. Pros and cons, I guess.
I always feel that you know the story of the emperor without clothes? You know that little kid that said, oh my God, he hasn't got clothes? The only one that had the guts to say it. That's what I've done all my life. And the reason being is that I always believe in the truth. You know, say the truth. And the world is full of lies. So I always felt that I should be there trying to fight for the truth, fight for making the world a better place. So I had all these roles all my life, fighting for a better course. So that's why doing the project that I did in South Africa made sense. And doing this is like 100% who I am. But in order to fight for what's right, the number one obligation is you need to educate yourself. And the most amazing thing about this industry is that all the information is in the internet. You don't need to wait for someone to teach you. You can go and do that yourself. So I always say to people, wake up. Smell the roses, go and read. Start with reading Satoshi's paper, and then from there on, subscribe to all the newsletters and massive amount of emails and mediums and blogs. And isn't it true there's so much wealth of information out there? There's no excuse for people to say, oh, I don't know how it works. I think that people must be aware that life is a lifelong learning. Your whole life you'll have to study. And this is the time, more than ever, that you have to go out there and do it yourself.
What interesting stories. So I think it's a combination for most people of nature and nurture. And if you look across ConsenSys, my guess is that people have a similar personality disorder that you can point. You know, some good genetic testing can probably find it. You know, so for me, I've had I have a two-sided brain, so I lean very analytical and abstract thinking. I have a law and a business degree in economics earlier on, and at the same time, I've always been a practicing visual artist. So I grew up painting and drawing, and then doing web design and things of that nature. And
the new Codefi logo shows that, I think, Lex.
Yeah, so I've gone through 4 designers for Codefi, one of whom had to take 2 vacations, and I've only been here for 4 months. So that tells you how it is. But I do think, you know, especially for people young in their early in their career, it's really hard if you have sort of this multiplicity of interests. You know, if you want to do economics, but you also love hard rock, and you're really, you know, not until you're the CEO of Goldman Sachs do you get to be both a DJ and a banker. And so that's been something that's really nice over the last decade for me, is that I've been able to bring these 2 things to bear and kind of combine them in a place like ConsenSys helps you exercise both the left and right side of the brain. And so to tell that visual arts story, I think as an artist, and I'm sure as a writer and a musician, but as a visual artist, you start with a blank sheet of paper, and you have 2 choices. The first choice is what it is that you're going to render, whether it's something that you see or you have an emotion, but you're rendering it in the blank sheet. And this is kind of like figuring out, you know, a new business that you're starting, or a new initiative, or sort of a new concept. And then the second thing that you have as a choice is the language that you're rendering the thing in. So you're forced to choose the abstract representational system in which you are depicting your subject matter. And so I think like in the entrepreneurial journey, for me, that's been really helpful, because I'm able to think not just about like how do we deliver a better investment experience or banking experience, but what is the system in which what is the language in which we're delivering that particular product or experience. And I think if you look at blockchain-based abstract systems, they're just a much nicer thing to render this stuff in. And so for me, that's been a clarity that has helped me move forward.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, to add to all these very nice stories, I'm fascinated by things I can improve myself. So I look at things and I really feel this is inefficient. How can people live with this? And there's a lot of that in the commodity trade and commodity trade finance industry. That industry has been stuck in time and space for 200 years. And they actually never change their habits. It's still the paper that moves across the globe. Banks that demand on a wet signature because otherwise they could not trust what they see. Still, they trust a piece of paper with a wet signature. So how much improvements can you bring there? Quite a lot, I would say. And then there are many ways to solve that question. You could solve it conventionally. You could solve it intelligently. So it's the puzzle that I admire and that I get attracted to. I easily get bored once I've solved something. You need to put me on a different job. So startup is the right kind of environment for me to work in. But once it's there, I need to have a new startup, I guess. Otherwise, I get really bored. So the next thing I'm looking at is quantum technology and all of that. So that may be next. I don't believe in NP hard problems. I feel and see them as a challenge, something that we did not solve yet, but I'm going to solve it.
Great, so we have the artist, the challenger, and the renegade troublemaker. Well, so, and many of you came from traditional financial services, you know, the established world, consulting, a bank, Bernstein research. What would you say, I mean, we've learned a little bit about your mindset, but that decision to jump from those very safe, very stable, very important positions of creating value in the space that you know into this highly ambiguous environment. Here at Sibos, it's interesting because we're all over in the discover zone with the fintechs, and the bankers are obviously, you know, next door with their booths that they've been coming to for the 70s. Just some observations of advice you would give from people that are in the legacy industry about, you know, either entering the space or exploring or learning more about new emerging technologies that can keep them changing at the pace that the world is increasingly changing.
The truth is, it's very hard because your identity, it's aligned to this tradition, you know, that you have this office, that you are treated in a certain way, you have a PA, you travel first class, you go to amazing hotels. So all that, people are going to not give it up so quickly. That's a reality. You have to really believe in the vision to say, that is just an illusion, and I'm going to go and work for what I truly believe in. And the majority of people won't be able to do that, so they're going to wait it out until they retire. I'm being very honest.
So you think it comes down to sort of an appetite or tolerance for risk and changing your identity?
100%, you know.
I think it's, you know, you got to take a sociological point of view, like you're saying, and people's identities being wrapped up in things, but it requires being able to zoom out and seeing social systems and how they form and the narratives that are around these social systems. So the nice thing about being a person is you get to have at least some choice about what you're opting into. So while you can feel, you know, there's hard barriers that people have. Poverty, opportunity, employment, supporting a family. You know, we're talking from a position of luxury in terms of being able to make some of these career choices, so it's important to acknowledge that. But outside of that, you can make a choice of what narrative you step into. So you can choose to step into the narrative of the financial system is great as it is, there's no room for improvement, but you know, if you look more broadly, what you hear is that it's kind of a melting ice cube. So what most people in finance today probably feel like is that they're well paid, but but they're less well paid than 10 years ago, and that the direction of the water is sort of against them. Like things are eroding a little bit at the pricing level, across products, and so there's sort of like this slow negative beige bleeding out. It's not fast, but it is beige. Or you can choose this other growth narrative, right, where you have the discomfort of you're working in early stage, things are uncertain, you don't have necessarily all that much funding, there's a question mark around it, but you can choose to have your identity be around growth and transformation and empowerment and innovation, next generation stuff. And even though it's hard, I still really do believe it comes down to being able to see your position and then just figuring out what kind of life you want. What do you want to think every day?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see the choice as a very important element there as well. It also has come across on my path a few times. I had to face a very nasty situation with my family, with my son, who got very ill, and that made me realize, well, what's it all worth? What do you want to achieve in your life? Back then, I was a manager. I was a consulting manager at a big bank, and I was doing great projects, feeling very good about these things.
Mm-hmm.
But then I thought, okay, what kind of strange things this is? I started off as a career, as an engineer. I started with a lot of passion, developing my work, and then suddenly I felt forced in a path where you had to become a manager to make career. And a few years ago, I decided, okay, I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to find myself in an engineer role again. So I give up my business roles, and I'm going to sit in a lab. I'm going to work with young engineers. I'm going to train them up. I'm going to prepare them for the future. And look what it brought to me. It put me in a position to spin out and become a CTO of a marvelous company like komgo. And not only that, I also set an example for the engineers at ING, who now also think there is life possible after an engineer role. And things can really get interesting if we start here and work from here.
What advice, back to specifically your question, I think it's all about having a strategy, right? Regardless of the financial institution, even on the regulatory side, it is about having a strategy to look at all of these technologies, not just specifically blockchain. And if they choose to do nothing, that in itself is a strategic choice. But drifting and then expecting things to neatly fall on their lap in terms of creating the next big product, that just doesn't happen, unfortunately. So it's being proactive and exploring the technologies and experimenting. And I think some companies and some financial institutions have done a really good job of that.
Yeah.
And others less so. So I think, yeah, that's what I would say.
Great. I think we're coming up on time. I have so many continued questions for sort of the principles related to decisions. But for all of you guys, how do you keep prioritizing learning now? So you've made the jump into this really innovative space. You're doing the things you're passionate about that keep you curious. What do you read on a daily basis to keep yourself fresh about the pace of change? Who do you read? And then how do you find that time to continue to carve out that self-education?
So in my case, I became a professor at a university, so I have to lecture. They always say that the best way to learn is to teach. So I have to learn because I have this pressure of lecturing, number one. So every morning, 2 to 3 hours in the morning, I sit in my computer and I catch up with all my reading. And there's lots of other, ways that I recommend to people. Like, for example, I love Medium because it has these incredible blogs and the latest thinking. And with your finger, if you cannot read it that day, you can save it into, Instapaper, or there's lots of apps that gives you this ability to create a database. And then when you're sitting in the train or doing nothing, then you catch up. But the whole idea is to be obsessed about reading, and everything is available in the internet, and then teaching. The more you teach, the more you learn.
Right.
So super, exactly the same, in a different form. The best way to read is to write. So I write a weekly newsletter. I've done it for about 3.5 years now. And because other people read it, I'm now terrified of looking dumb. So I've built fairly rigorous machine system that fetches RSS feeds and gives me the newsletters and trade magazines and sources like Medium that brings it together. And the thinking about it, I think, is the really hard part, rather than just snacking on it. So that's number one. And then number two is sometimes you got to do the deeper thinking as well, and rather than kind of the way I react in the newsletter. And I'd recommend for people to do this. About a year ago, I did this thing where I started I did science fiction by decade. So I started with Dune, and then I just kind of hit the classics. So it was Dune.
Decade of when it was written, or decade of where it predicted the future?
No, good question. No, when it was written. So I did Dune, Neuromancer, Diamond Age for the 90s, Accelerando for the 2000s, and then the one for the 2010s is a great Chinese author who did the three-body problem. So, you can see how science fiction tells the story of the world, and then you can use that both as ideas to steal from, as well as to see how people were right and how they were wrong, and also just fun.
So I guess for both of you, it's signing up for an accountability of structure, whether it's your students or your readers, where you can't get out of it anymore.
Yeah, so for me, learning happens everywhere. So I recently decided to walk to the office. It's a 3.5 kilometers walk. You have to work that out in miles, by the way. I have no clue.
20 miles.
There you go. And I like doing that because it clears the mind. Before I get into the office, I have done my exercise, and at the same time, I'm listening to podcasts. And what I really enjoy there is to learn about what's the emotion in the world. So I listen to the TED Talks. I listen to various newsletters that happen there, and I also have like geek kind of programs that I'm very fond of. My learning is also preparing to teach, indeed, and to bring the information further and to help other people. So I wrote a white paper also on interoperability that I tested also with other people. And I'm preparing lectures for University of Geneva, where I'm teaching also a bit back to the industry. What I like to read is it's very stupid. If you look at my Amazon reader, it's filled with all kinds of books on computer languages. It's also therapy for me to read. And I read these stupid books because I'm keen to repeat the story and to retrain myself in other languages. So, for instance, to give you an example, with a friend of mine, we are in this evolving game of breaking big integers into 2 primes. And we would like to do that very fast and find scalable solutions to do that. So he created a program and he based it on a very nice mathematical model, and he did it in 40 seconds. I thought, okay, this Python is slow. Well, let me do it in C++, multi-threaded. And did it 20 seconds. But then it does not stop there. It goes further. So then I thought, okay, let's go closer to the iron. Let's do this in C. So I rewrote it in C, 11 seconds. Still not satisfied. So now I even went that far that I wrote it now in assembly. And writing things in assembly today is a true challenge, but it's under 2 seconds now. And now I'm feel very, very comfortable that I mastered this and can scale it up.
Are you still friends with your friend who wrote it in 40 seconds?
Yes, I am, because he's a truly amazing guy, and he also teases me with these things, and he knows that he's teasing me because he knows that this guy is going to find where it will end, where it's no longer to optimize much further. And I like him to tease me as well. So it's a game that we play together. It's not to offend him or to.
I think everything you need to know about the innovator's mindset is explained by that's a game for you. Yeah. That's what you do for fun. And I appreciate that, like a good Dutchman, you incorporate exercise into your educational process. And what about you, Lory?
3 quick points. So I try and do at least 1 course every year, regardless of how.
That you take?
Yeah, that I take. So whether that is, I guess, on the business side, whether it's learning to be a Scrum Master. I'm actually starting a program next week with INSEAD around diversity. So that's an online course for over the course of 6 weeks. And that is something that I've just kind of kept on going. And I think that helps me meet people, but also pick up one or two things that I'm able to use in my job, whether they're frameworks to help come up with, I guess, new business ideas or whatever it is. So that's 1. 2, I learn from people just like these magnificent people and everyone else here in this room. So I really do. So when I come to conferences like this, I try particularly hard to listen as much as I can and actively listen. And I find I learn a huge amount from that. And then when I come back or go back to Ireland, I'm able to, I guess, download all the information that I've gleaned and share that with the team. And then thirdly, I am also, there's a bit of a teaching kind of vein running through this. I'm a lecturer at Trinity College Dublin, so I teach on the MBA program there.
Fantastic. Well, so students and teachers and all of you guys, as a final wrap-up question, in the movie of your innovative life, who would play you?
Julia Roberts.
Tilda Swinton.
Keanu Reeves.
Fantastic. Trade finance.
I don't know. Daniel Craig. Yeah, there you go.
There you go. The James Bond of blockchain. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, guys, for your time. It was great to get to know a little bit more about all of you, and I hope you learned a little bit more about each other.
Thank you.
Thank you,
very
everybody.
much. Cheers.